Okay. Where is? Did you have the screen share still turned on or something?
I turned it off.
Some reason I don't see it.
Maybe it doesn't make you the presenter.
Oh, maybe you have to make me. Oh, no, wait, I can take presenter. Okay. There we go.
You still want to use the room mic, right?
Okay. Screen.
That's right.
Full screen. Sharing. Okay. Hopefully folks on the live stream can see the screen share now. So I will just bring slideshow. Okay, get this out of the way. And yeah, if you want to use the microphone, just don't move too far away from the laptop, and the remote should be able to hear me. Okay, in the room.
All right. Good afternoon. Do you want to say some opening remarks?
So yeah, thanks for coming out, everybody. What we're going to do today is do some solutions to some of the Capture the Flag challenges. I would love for this to be an audience participation event. So if you have a challenge that you want to show off, just come on up. You can plug in your laptop. No need to be embarrassed about incredibly ugly and complicated flow graphs. That's how they always end up during a Capture the Flag. So if you have anything you would like to show a little later in the presentation, just put up your hand and show things. And if nobody wants a particular challenge, then we'll have the challenge designer come up here and show things. Anyway, I'm going to hand it right off to Kyle and the Aerospace team to show off an overview of how their challenges work. So take it over, Kyle.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me online still. I'm Kyle Loeb. I come from Aerospace, but we sort of did this after hours. We really like participating in these challenges every year. It's, people are very creative about kind of the thought and the GNU Radio work that goes into these things. And with me I have Leah, Bethany, and Jason, and they all worked on little parts of it, so I'm going to hand it off to them as we go. A couple months ago we got together and sort of brainstormed up an idea, and then we tried to think of a theme to sort of tie things together. So obviously we use ChatGPT to write some of our flavor text, which you may or may not have noticed. But yeah, we'll get right into the first one, and I'll hand it off to Leah.
So I tried to make this one pretty simple. It's a stereograph. So if you look at the generated stereogram that I have at the top right there, if you stare at it long enough, you'll start to see an image, and it's supposed to be a squirrel. So for the challenge, I actually blurred it a little bit just to make it a little more interesting. I think even with the blur, you might be able to make it out, or it might look a little bit like something else. So if you applied a filter, and in the solution I did an unsharp mask, then it should sharpen the image a little bit better, and then you should be able to see it a little bit clearer. So in this result, you can see that it's a squirrel, I think, but some people said a Loch Ness monster. I guess it depends if you look at it from the left or the right. So if you look at it from the right, it's a squirrel. Oh yeah, I got someone else said turtle too, so, but yeah, it's a squirrel.
Hi, I'm Jason. So for my challenge, I thought back to the olden days of text messaging when you had a phone numpad and you had to manually type text, each letter. So I thought about just the DTMF and multi-tap encoding. So, there's an audio file. I wonder if I can play it.
Oh, my volume might be turned down a bit there.
Oh, okay.
Try that.
Right, so it's just a sequence of numbers encoded in DTMF, and then if you, with your phone pad, transcribe it, you'll get the message, tell Dr. Gnome the flag is elegant, and that's the flag.
All right, so sort of keep switching domains here a little bit, but this one, because our our protagonist in our thing was sort of a detective. We added this one in the last minute, and many of you have probably seen the Maltese Falcon with Humphrey Bogart, but in that movie he's going after the Maltese Falcon, and you download a file called falcon.stl, which looks like this. But if you're a 3D printing person or you're familiar with 3D modeling, you can open it up in Blender, or in this case Prusa Slicer, as I show here, and if you cut the model vertically down into the model, you'll see that there's like a QR code embedded within the model itself. And you might have had to fiddle with the colors a little bit, like I did here, to make it readable on your phone, but it does decode nicely to some sequence of numbers. So this one, called Unscrambling the Echoes, this is like the actual hard radio one that I put together. And this one was actually 2 voice tracks next to each other, and if you play it by shifting the signals, it just sounds like this. Was that coming over? Basically, it sounds horrible. But there's this Russian voice scrambler that I was kind of inspired by when I was writing this thing. And it's called this Cry 2001. This is a link to the SIG-ID wiki. It sounds really cool over the speakers, but you can kind of just make out little bits of voice sequence in there. So what I did is I used the Black Mesa announcement system. For those of you who played Half-Life, this is like the voice that you hear over the speakers as you're like wandering through the laboratories. And there's a guy online who's created like a generator, so you can like type in script, and it uses voice clips from the game, which are like these vocoded voices. And this is the actual decoded audio.
Message. Charlie, Austin, India, Foxtrot, Uniform, Romeo, Echo, over.
Which sounds nice and clean, but obviously I understand people were demodulating or descrambling it, and it was a little bit hard to hear every little syllable, which we had problems with too on other challenges. But I created this in GNU Radio Companion, and this is a kind of a neat way to pull in maybe like a NumPy array or just like an array of numbers and use it as amplitude modulation that you can then convert to frequency shift. So here in this vector source, if you download my GRC file, there's just like a string that has the quote-unquote password. That's like the voice shifts that are happening as time goes over the flow graph. But it reads them in and interpolates them, and then over here, where it has the frequency mod, it's using the amplitudes from the secret, essentially, to generate a frequency, and then that's multiplied by the input signal, this audio box. And in this case, there were a pair of audio tracks that were encoded, and one of them had a clue you needed for part 5 of the Noir challenges, but the other one was just the plain flag for this challenge. And I gave everyone like the encoder, but I didn't give them the decoder, so it was kind of a practice in GRC for everyone. I'm going to hand it off to Bethany for her very difficult one, turns out to be.
Hi, so this is our last challenge, or our last non-meta challenge. So we kind of picked it to be like in order of difficulty. So it has a few steps. Basically, you're given a signal, and you somehow end up with a chessboard that you have to solve. And I'm going to go through how you end up there. So this is my solution. At baseband, there's an audio signal, and it's just it's an AI voice, saying white to move, mate in 1. So if you just send it to an audio sync, you can hear like pretty, as long as you low pass filter, pretty clearly that she's saying that, and that kind of makes you think, oh, maybe this is a chess problem. And the other thing is in the SIGMF file, or in the metadata file, there is a bit of description that says that white is on channel A and black is on channel B. And so the way to get the actual location of the pieces for the chess puzzle on that chessboard is you just send each of those channels to GRAIS receiver, and then if you direct it to a PDU to NEMA block, then suddenly you just get this nice printout of these NEMA messages, and that's exactly what you see. And then you can decode them. There's a lot of tools to do that. You can just copy paste them online. There's like a few decoders that you can just look up, or you can use PyAIS. So in this example, it's kind of small, but the user ID is like really the last step to get. So in that case, it's 81, and you know what piece it is based on the ASCII, like what the ASCII is. So it's like P, Q, R, B, N, K in ASCII. And then you end up with this board, which matches the one I showed 2 slides ago, but I just put it into chess.com to show that the mate in 1 move would be queen to c7. And so our flag was flag QC7. And it was worth 199 points because it was our most difficult challenge. But yeah, that's how you solve it.
How many people solved that?
We have a question?
Oh, she just...
Oh, she asked how many people solved the challenge. I think this was 2 other people with a little bit of help on the CTF chat. Most of our other challenges were solved by 10 or 15 people, so I think we had pretty good difficulty ramp. Let's see. And then the very last one, we just wanted a challenge that would sort of tie the other ones together. And I left the word yoga brain in here by accident, so the location that the detective goes to is the junkyard, not the junkyard yoga brain. But in any case, yeah, so this is just, if you've gotten maybe 4 out of the 5 challenges, you could solve this one, like guessing the name of the adversary. And got our GitHub repo if you want to know more, but otherwise I'll pass it back to Clayton. Thanks, everyone.
Anyone have questions about these challenges, things that they didn't quite get and want answered?
Or strange ways they solved it.
All right.
Yeah.
In that case, question? Comment?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you ended up helping cheese this out a little bit, but I actually ended up demodding that voice scrambler with just a big enough AM decoder over the whole thing, and it was more or less intelligible. There was really only 1 syllable that was giving me a lot of trouble in there.
Right.
But yeah, I thought that was kind of amusing.
Cool. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks again to the Aerospace team. All right. Now I'll take the, don't need the presentation anymore. And just double checking here, can someone in the big blue button remote just confirm that they're still hearing audio and videos coming through and everything? Yes. Okay, good. All right. So who would like to go next? Someone have something they want to present? Vlad?
Is there a way I can share my screen?
Yes. Do you want to? Okay. You'll have to sign into the big blue button if you want to share it from your machine. The link is in the link is in the chat.
Oh, okay. Maybe someone else can do it.
Mine's working.
Okay. Yeah, Jeff's going to come up and present, and I guess you wanted to have your flow graphs fired up here, so let me bring those up. Okay, so I think those should be the 3 flow graphs, so I'll hand the microphone off to Jeff.
Thank you. I did these kind of last minute, then we'll work on some longer ones next year. But okay, so this is the, let's see, I'm going to start with the flags 1 and 2. So what this was, 4 flags read phonetic alphabet and just combined in different ways. So it turned out that the first one, if you listen to it in stereo, you just hear one voice. Go ahead.
Which challenge is this? No.
Oh, I'm sorry. This one is the numbers mix-up. Yeah, I'll give you the names. So for this one, if you listen to the center track on this, if you look at the signal, it was kind of a center track and two signals modulated off to the side. Center track, you could kind of hear a voice dead center, and the other one was stereo wide right. I didn't really mean it to be that easy, but you could do it that way. In any case, they were left plus right and right plus left, if you think of these two as making a stereo signal. The other ones were a little harder because first they were rotated, so you had to rotate them back to center and then just guess what the math was. So in this case, we took the left plus right, added it to flag 3, and the left minus right, and added it to flag 2. Now, if you had really good ears, I bet you could have heard 3 flags at once and said, well, in here, I heard these 2 flags, and now I hear a voice saying a third one. So maybe you could solve it that way. The solution I had for that was, and I use a high DPI machine, so my flow graphs always end up spread really wide when you get to anything else. So simple add and subtract for the first 2 flags, and then taking flow to complex to make it something you can rotate, rotating the 2 side signals back to center, and then doing subtracts. So it's kind of a simple way. Did anybody do it just by ear for the flags 3 and 4?
Could you actually play them?
If I hit play, it'll just create the files. I don't have the WAV files all set.
What's the map on the rotators? Can you open that up real quick?
Sure. Come on. There we go. So it turned out to be 12K. It was just a random number that shifted it enough that it was out of the way. Okay, so that was the numbers mix-up flags 1 through 4. And then the second challenge, I think I called digital and voice. And this was kind of 2 challenges in one. The first one was just a matter of figuring out what the digital signal was. It was NRSC5 which can be generated with FLDigi, and I think there are a couple other packages you could have used to decode it. And the way you found that is you went to SIGID Wiki, and they have audio samples, and if you listen carefully, it's about the only thing that sounds like that, and has that width. So that was just a question of running it through the right decoder, and it gave you a bunch of Lorem Ipsum with a flag in the middle. The second one was a little bit along the lines of the echoes one that was just described, but the key was the digital signal. So it was multiplied, let's see, where do I have it? Here. And added just enough modulation. The reason the MFSK64 was chosen is it added just enough modulation that you could tell it was voice, but there was no way you were going to understand it, although I hear people tried and got close. So that was modulated by that signal. You take the Hilbert transform, so you get a one-sided thing to modulate with. That's the equivalent of what we just saw with using a VCO to do essentially the same thing. So solving that, same flow graph here. What I did is I shifted both back to center. Again, these, I think they were shifted, I can't remember where I shifted them exactly, because it didn't matter. Here I came up with magic numbers to shift both back so that when I used multiply conjugate, which demodulates it using the same signal, it ended up right at center. If it didn't end up at center, then you could have plugged the resulting signal into GQRX and seen a double sideband suppressed carrier signal. And the easiest way in GQRX to listen to that is just using the lower or upper sideband modes, and either one of those would make it clear. It turned out that just adding the real and imaginary off of the demodulated version was enough to make it clear here too. So, did anybody solve this by demodulating it? Okay. And did anybody solve it by listening and guessing? Not enough people here to be representative. Maybe.
Very close.
Yeah.
Within 2 letters.
Yeah. I'm really surprised that you got that close. All right. So those were the two, and I'll be back and do some more next year.
Any questions for Jeff? Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, just to clarify, like, yeah, just to clarify on the unmixing. So what are you supposed to do to unmix to get flags 3 and 4? So I got like the way I tried to demodulate it or do it was so I separated out the 4 channels. So you have the center channels on the voice tracks. There's a left channel and a right channel, and there's the high or low sides on each of those, right? So I have 4 recordings in the end, and then I just played around with those 4 to try to get something intelligible. So add 1 and 2, subtract 1 and 2. And the way I got it for 3 and 4 was to just like add or subtract like the high channels, and then subtract out the unmixed 1 and unmixed 2, because we're able to get those by adding and subtracting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was never able to completely eliminate like the 1 and 2 from there, but it just like attenuated it a lot, so I was able to kind of make it out after guessing and checking some number of times. But what was the actual math operation?
Yeah, so that would get you pretty close. But the way I did it was rotating those 2 sideband signals back down to DC, and then since I knew, and you would have had to guess, that it was the left plus right and the left minus right that were added to those flags, just subtract those off. But subtracting off just one of them, right, that removed one voice and left another one in there, so it made it easier at least. But yeah, that was the intent, is to subtract left plus right from flag 3 and left minus right from flag 4. Okay.
Any other questions? All right, in that case, Vlad, are you ready to go?
I think so. Do I have to have permission to share my screen or something?
Yes. I will give you screen sharing permission. Make presenter.
Oh boy.
Okay, you should be able to present now. I guess we can plug into your HDMI if you want.
Okay, hopefully I don't make a mess. Alright. What are we gonna get?
I'll keep my laptop nearby so the microphone still records you.
Do I have to press something here?
Oh, to present, it's down there.
No, I mean to get this to go.
Oh, you need to enable the video. Oh, there it goes.
Jeez,
Okay, now you just need to mirror screens.
Oh boy. All right. Technical difficulties. Mirror. Apply. Keep changes. There we go. All right. Okay, let me just go back to sound. And I have to share my screen. Okay, hopefully. All right, yeah, looks like that's working. Okay, so I did the Not Really Superior Clatter V challenge, which is a really bad backronym for NRSC5. If you're not familiar, that's this HD radio standard, and this is something that Clayton and I have sort of been cracking at for a little while. You may have seen these signals on the air. Now a lot of analog FM stations also send these digital sidebands along with them with additional audio programs. And so inspired by our development working on this, mostly Clayton and some of me moaning, this doesn't work. Sometime later we actually got this to decode on a whole bunch more radios, and Clayton asked me if I wanted to make a challenge for this year's CTF, so I said, what the heck, why not? So basically, GRNRSC5 is the transmitter that I used. I'll show the flow graph here. It's this guy. This is a whole mess. I came out to a 47.7 millibal, if you're curious. Basically, this is an analog FM transmitter, an HD transmitter, and it's got the RDS on it. I did all 8 channels, which is the maximum possible for the HD spec. Each one of them is sending data. Each one of them has unique audio. And just for fun, I also used some of the rarely used extensions for the analog portion of the signal as well, which threw some people off for sure. I think there was all but one of the flags that was solved. This had a total of 17 flags, mostly piecemeal, just hiding little messages here and there. So I was actually pretty happy that people got most of them. I had a few in here that were quite mean. So I'll just show you quickly some of the recommended tools and ways that I have of solving this. Really, it came down to did you read the standard, or at least are you aware of what's in the standard, and have you tried a bunch of commonly used tools? This one didn't require too much signal processing per se. So I recommend, well, at least I personally like NRSC5 GUI. It's a GUI wrapper for the NRSC5 receiver. So I'll show you this in a second. This is, I think, the easiest way to get about like 3/4 of the flags, maybe more, pretty quickly. The other thing I'll show you here real quick is what I mentioned earlier, the Subsidiary Communications Authority. This is in the US FM broadcast standard, basically detailing how you can also have additional analog subcarriers on your regular analog FM signal. So you may be wondering, why am I talking about this? Well, let's see what you would get when you tried to receive my signal for the first time. So I'm going to pull up GQRX. This is the baseband we eventually sent out. This was also being transmitted on site, so you could have just come with your RTL, SDR, or what have you and seen this. So let me turn up my volume a little bit, set this to the correct. Here we go. Oh, you can hardly hear that. But that's the... What? Oh. Yeah, I guess someone online can hear that. I don't know. Not enough gain. Well, you probably don't hear that very well, I'm sorry. It's not very loud. Anyway, you get the idea. There's just some music playing on here, which actually threw some people off for quite a while. It was kind of funny. People were really expecting there to be like flags actually hidden in the signal, but in a classic case of diversion, I didn't put anything here. And in fact, it never even looped. This pulls live from my online radio stream, so you could have listened for probably about 4,000 hours and never heard the same thing twice. So a lot of people made like hour-long recordings of this thing, expecting there to be, a top of the hour message or something, but that was not the case. So the first flag you could get here was just on the radio data system. So in GQRX, if you just go turn that on and tick this box, you can see all this information in the bottom right that populates. This is like radio text. Normally stations would send, what track is playing. So here you would find the first flag hidden in here. So really, that's all that you can get from a tool like GQRX. Obviously, you can see here that there's also these sidebands that might have also lead you to, maybe look into what kind of signal this might be. These are, of course, the HD subcarriers. So the next flag that was easiest to, well, at least most straightforward to solve off the analog was the second carrier audio. So this Flowgraph just basically pulls that off for you. I essentially play in my baseband, drop a filter on there, and then I do a FM demod, shift that carrier down to baseband, and then put that out to an audio sync. So if I run this, I don't know if you can hear that. One second. That is the telltale sound of Robot 36 slow scan television if you're a ham. So that might have been another one you would want to pop into SIG-ID Wiki or something if you didn't recognize it. But what are we looking at here? Basically, at the top, we have the baseband that we just saw in GQRX, and then this signal here is actually the FM demod of the analog. So on the far left, you have the summed audio channels. Then you have your stereo pilot here. This is your left minus right for stereo. You see the radio data system carrier on which the first flag was hidden. And then this funny peak, if you saw this, you would be like, that shouldn't be there, and that's correct, because this is that second carrier, or this subsidiary carrier authority thing that's in the standard that no one uses. And so that's where this signal is located, and that's what we just listened to being demodulated. So if we take this audio and we pipe it into a software like QSS-TV, now you'll see it actually start to decode an image. And eventually, in about 15 seconds, you'll see the entirety of the flag. So this is just a very, in a way, it's like a very, very, very slowed down NTSC. It's FM technically, so it's not quite the same, but similar kind of idea of where, you have an analog sweep scanning across your, to produce your image lines. So there you go. There's flag number 9. So now for the fun part. HD. So earlier I mentioned the NRSC5 DUI. That would be my preferred way of doing this. So here I'm just going to run this, start it up, and this is of course loading baseband. So you immediately see it actually populates the first station image there, and I'll turn my volume up again. But that's on the HD carrier one. So what you'll immediately notice is that there's 8 buttons here for 8 different programs. So now we can go through all of these and just get a little idea of what's on all of them.
Charlie, Victor, capital Zulu, Echo, Kilo, Foxtrot, capital Kilo, flag is Andrew Ryan. The second flag is Andrew Ryan.
So, as you can see, I was pretty mean in that there was only really one plain flag on here. The rest of them are kind of hidden. You may have already noticed as I'm clicking through these, there's a few flags hidden in metadata, like the title and the artist. So here, flag number 7 was Nyquist. You go back through some of these. Here's another one that just says N69. Here's some hex. Let's see. Oh, yes. HD 2 through 5 was a single flag split across the artist of the 5 channels. So you had to dump your log or just, copy each segment from here manually. And then you may have noticed that as I'm sitting here clicking through these, you see some interesting images popping up here in the album art. So each one of these HD signals also has some data associated with it. So here you actually see the files are being dumped by NRSC5, so you can look at everything that's being pulled. So first you obviously have the station logo that we already saw. Then you have these 4 pieces of a QR code that if you stitch together, you got another flag. Then you have this one, which was also straightforward. It was just our company logo, so there was another relatively simple flag to get. And then you had this funny black image, and might mislead some people into thinking, well, there's nothing here. Well, that's not true. If you, and I don't have an example on hand, but essentially the flag is written such that the actual flag is just 1 pixel, or rather 1 color index above black. So if you dropped it into a tool and just like cranked the contrast, you would see the flag. Now, what also diverted people for quite a while is that they might have gotten this flag and thought they were done. Not the case, because this image also, along with several others, has other data, mainly files, hidden on it via steganography, which is pretty annoying, to be honest. I don't blame people for being angry at me for this. I deserve it. This was a dick move. But, you know, you run it through enough tools, you probably find something. Oh, I guess the other one I should mention is HD8 usually sends this image, which is a QR code, and you might think that, oh, I should scan this, in which case you would be rickrolled. Because it doesn't actually contain... yes, that one was just a rickroll. However, in another diversionary tactic, just to make sure you didn't get too comfortable there. Oh, sometimes it bugs out when it re-downloads this image. Here, I'll go find you the original. If you open this image and you look really, really closely after you've been rickrolled, presumably, you look real closely and you see there's something a little bit messed up with this QR code. So you might zoom in and you see, oh yeah, there really is something going on down here. You see these little, at the very, very bottom, these dotted lines. So if you were crazy enough to hand jam this into an ASCII, binary to ASCII converter, you would get another flag. Of course, you had to, you know, just get this zoomed in enough that you saw the individual pixels to know what's a 1 and a 0, but it was just plain text ASCII. So the truly villainous part of HD8 is that every 5-ish minutes or so, the image was substituted by the transmitter. Every 5-ish minutes, instead of sending out the rickroll QR, it would send out a different QR code under the exact same file name and dimensions. So unless you were actively watching or running MD5 sums or something on your files that you're receiving, you probably wouldn't have noticed. So this real image was doubly evil. This is the real one. Because when you scanned this, you would get garbage text. And this, actually, the clue to this threw a lot of people off for quite a long time because people kept asking me, what is this text that's in the station slogan? So here there's another plain text flag hiding in the message, but also in this slogan, you'll see AES, colon, and a bunch of garbage. And people spent a long time trying to figure out what this AES key was for. They were trying it against all kinds of stuff, and it was very funny because nobody even had the correct door to use the key on, so to speak. So I think eventually one person did get this, but basically you needed to use this AES key to decode the message in the correct QR code. So that was worth the most points. Let's see, I don't think I mentioned the text that was on, I think it was HD 6 or 7. Oh, that's right, I have to restart this. The text on one of these, oh yes, so the audio that is playing on this one
Romeo, Kilo, capital X-ray, Foxtrot.
Just a bunch of phonetics. That threw people off for a while because they kept putting this in as a flag, and this was my fault because I really didn't specify that they needed to do more work. But this was a ROT69 cipher. So you just drop it into like decode.fr or something and rotate the alphabet index of each character by 69, and you would get the correct message. Really, that's 26. That's mod 26, which comes out to like something like 17 or whatever. But you know, the funny number is funny, so that's what I put for the clue. So that was supposed to indicate to you that there was a little bit something more there. Now, for the title and artist on HD6, this was actually a Zor encryption, so you just had to Zor these two together, and you'd get another flag. Let's see. Which have I missed? I think the last one might be. Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to show now. So this strange sound that you're listening to right now. Will probably throw some people off for a while, which it did. This is just a classic use of GR to paint an audio spectrum. However, it ended up being very, very, very slow because I had a very large FFT size, and the compression on the NRSC5 is not very kind. Oh, it seems to have switched out my audio device. Apologies. Recording. That's frustrating. I'm sorry about that. Alright, so it missed some of it. It started grabbing my mic instead of the audio off the thing. But this goes very slow. I think you have to dwell here for like 3 or 4 minutes to get the whole flag. Actually, we're going to catch it right at the bottom here, fortunately. So I'll just zoom up a bit on this. But yes, because of the large FFT size and actually the compression used by NRSC5, I had to use a really low bit rate because I had so many carriers. And NRSC5 does some really, really strange things. It has these perceptual audio codecs that will copy certain spectral bands and just paste them up frequency, which is really bad when you're trying to do a spectrum paint and all your crap starts folding back in on itself and destroying your image. So I had to band limit this, and that combined with a large FFT just made it very slow. But there you go. There you see another flag. And with that, let's see. Did I miss any? Oh, yes. I never really showed how the steganography works. So just for those of you that are sitting here thinking I'm like a total jerk for including these are like not possible. One of the Stego ones, I used the tool Open Stego. So I'm going to open this now. And here you just select the message file. So if we go to my directory here, we'll just go to the root of the actual one. And then HD1, for instance. Oh, that was supposed to be extract data, not encrypt. Here's the input Stego file, and then do this into my home. You hit extract data. Oh, whoops, wrong one. I think. Oh yeah, that's because this one I used a different one. This was the wrong image. It was HD6. I must have used this on. Oh. Well, now I'm showing you that my challenge was impossible.
Did anyone solve this one?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, not this one specifically, but the other Stego one. It was... Oh, actually, it was because I didn't actually encode anything in this one in particular. There we go. There we go. There's flag 13. I have the wrong file. So then if we go flag 13 is coffee with Tommy's. Inside joke. So that was one of the Stego challenges. Then, let's see, I had Steg Hide, and then it was, oh, don't remember what the, oops. It was,
Steg high extract.
yeah. Do this. There was no password. But there you go. See, it actually detects flag 11, whatever, we overwrite that, and there you would have had flag 11. So, that was a bit lengthy, but I think that was all the flags. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the only one that went unsolved was the HD6 logo, because after having found the contrast enhanced image, people didn't think that there would be more there, and who could blame them? But yeah, that's it. Yeah.
What was the YouTube video you linked to?
Oh, that one was.
You are not a seeker?
Oh yes, by Jen McKenna. Yes, excellent letter. That there's nothing to it. It's just a good work.
It seemed very random.
All of these flags are pretty random.
Honestly, the whole thing felt like a ritual.
Yeah, I guess, does anyone have any questions on any of the other ones?
What was your view?
Compliance? That was one of the flags. Oh, yes, actually, thank you. That did remind me. There was one more that I did forget. On HD channels 2 through 5, appreciate that reminder. This one, actually kind of funny. I ended up pulling someone else's solution to this because it was honestly easier than stitching this back together myself, though I have done this. So if you recorded the audio off of HD channels 2 through 5, you may have noticed there was a snippet of some strange sound in between the looping music. And if you reversed all this and then stitched it back in the correct order, you would get this.
Flag is compliance by news.
So I'll play that again.
Flag is compliance by news.
So that wasn't part of the, because electronic music a lot of times have random samples anyway, right? So that wasn't part of the, okay.
Yes, that was another flag. Now, I wouldn't blame it. That one was a little bit hard to understand. It's probably if you stand here, it's a little bit easier. But that one definitely had a bit of a poor SNR. So
Flipped them all and like inverted every other one so that the music canceled out.
oh, that's clever. Yeah, because it was time. It should have been like sample perfect timing, actually.
Yes, I played them all together. Yeah, flipped them all, put them all in the same thing. Or reversed them all, put them all in the same audacity.
Yeah.
Inverted every other channel, and then played them all together.
And then I'm guessing, were you able to solve it? Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Couldn't figure out what the muse was.
Ah, yeah. I had one person message me. I really should have said in the Matrix chat that you could send me this, because this particular file was actually sent to me by one of the participants. It was like, I just can't quite understand this. I was like, oh yeah, you got it. Here's what it is. So sorry, but I think that's all of them. About a weekend.
So Vlad, while you're all hooked up here, do you want to show the DBBS2 stuff? Or do you have anything ready?
I have nothing ready for that.
We'll switch over to mine. Danny's going to share a blog post within a couple of days. So
Okay, yeah, sorry.
No need.
It's a mess. Getting it was a mess, so.
all right, let me get my laptop back hooked up here. Actually, before I launch into mine, is there anyone here who wants to show off a solution to one of the other challenges, or even one of these challenges? Anyone want to come up and show something?
I'd like to say something
Sam,
about solving a solution.
go ahead.
I will just say that this was Anton, who was one of my team members' attempt to, or suggestion for, what was it, Fox 2, which is the mobile Fox, which was, he said to ask everyone wearing a white, well, basically any of the organizers. I expanded upon that and asked individuals, and that's how I found the flag. So pure brute forcing, which I know is very difficult. I will say that I do know there were some people who, even for Fox 1, waited until after things had been cleared away to proceed to find it. I guess I should say where Fox 1 was, which I think was really, yeah. Unless, Toby, would you like to?
Go ahead.
Okay. So, Fox 1 was located at the Redwire vendor booth location. Originally, you guys had it under the table, but it then had to be moved from there because no one seemed willing to ask if, other than one person? One person who was totally prepared and just dove right in and found it. They had a flashlight too, right?
They had a flashlight beam to look under all the tables with.
Yeah.
So the one person had a flashlight, the spotlight came in looking under the tables, had no problem finding it going on. And then, so we moved it actually back behind the sign, so it was just hidden, like in plain sight if you just looked around the corner a little bit. And people would go back in the back corner because our booth was over in a corner here, and they'd go back, look all around the corner. We had stuff back there. They'd look all through all of that, turn around, walk right back out by it. It was just sort of sitting there. Very easy to see once you got over it.
Well, very easy to see if you look down.
Yes.
And then Fox 2, for most of the week, was held by awesome ASU support that we got from Brittany and Julianne. So I do recall the first people to get Fox 2 asked every single person sitting, and they were in the hall area with 4 chairs. They asked every single person besides Julianne until someone finally asked Julianne and got the Fox. So just, sometimes though, you don't have to necessarily just track it. You can also just ask people. Because if the Fox is carrying the Fox, they're you ask them for the Fox, they're supposed to hand it out. But just another method. Very clean.
Thanks, Sam. Anyone else have a solution they want to share? Okay, nobody for now, so I will plug my laptop back in and show you a few things. Actually, I may as well show off the Foxes first, since we were just talking about those. And yeah, I love Sam's solution for the Fox that was being carried by a person. I mean, there's only 250 people it could be. So process of elimination, you can figure out who it is.
Or Creighton will tell you that it's very, very high, the receive level.
So I'll just put those in front of the camera here so that people on the people remotely can see this. So this is what the what the Fox transmitter actually looked like. I built this using an Adafruit feather board. This particular one has an NRF69 RF transmitter on it. It's capable of FSK and a couple other things, but basically I'm just using it for on-off keying, and it was sending out the flag as Morse code. It transmits at a couple of milliwatts, so it should have been possible to hear it over a fairly large area. But if you were, a couple of walls beyond where it was, you probably would have needed to come closer. So as long as you were in the same room where the transmitter was, you should have been able to hear it very easily and get the first flag. And the second flag was just printed on the lid. I've removed that so that you could see the inside. But flag was printed on the lid, and you'd submit that to the scoreboard to get the rest of your points. And the way I usually like to find these things, I don't usually have a high gain antenna in my backpack or anything. I just have rubber dock antenna that doesn't really have any gain. And so what I usually do is I'll fire up a tool like GQRX, turn off the AGC. That way the audio will actually get louder when the RF is stronger, and then just kind of play the game of warmer and colder and move around until the signal gets stronger, and then turn down the RF gain and keep moving until I get close enough. And for the final bit, sometimes you even need to remove the antenna so that you have even less, add an extra 50 or 60 dB of attenuation, and then you can kind of just move your laptop around until you get to the place where it's the strongest. So that was that's what the boxes look like. Now, let me share my screen and we can go look at some of the other challenges here. Okay, hopefully folks on the live stream are seeing the screen share. I think so. Let's get this out of the way. So, where should we start? Do we have any requests from the audience for a solution you want to see, you're really curious about? Sam?
I didn't try that hard, but the DMOD ones?
DMOD. Okay, yeah, let's have a look at the DMOD 101 challenges. Okay, let me just go to DMOD. And first thing, let's take a look at these in Spectrum just to see what they look like. So DMOD, SIGMF, Meta. And actually, you know what I should have shown first is let's just take a look at the contents of the SIGMF Meta file. This is something that you probably should do anytime you're looking at a challenge that involves SIGMF, just to make sure there aren't any clues that are in the SIGMF meta file. In this case, you're told that the sample rate is 480,000. That number doesn't really say anything particular to me. And the frequency in this case is 433.9 megahertz. This is kind of an unlicensed band where all kinds of random transmitters, like on things like weather stations and key fobs and that, are running, and they usually are just, FSK, ASK, all kinds of things. So it doesn't really narrow down exactly what we're going to find on this frequency. So let's take a look at it in Spectrum and see what we have. Just adjust my power maximums and minimums here, and zoom out. And just increase my FFT size a little bit. So if we scroll through this signal, you can see there's actually a few bursts here that look like they contain data. There's one over on the left there, and we scroll over, there's another one, and there's a third one over on the right-hand side. So let's take a closer look at each of these and see what they might be. So first off, this one here. Let's zoom in on the time axis and scroll back over to have a look at it. And this one, you can, once we zoom in, you can very clearly see that the transmitter here is kind of, it transmits for a while and then it's just back to noise, and then it transmits for a while and then we're back to noise. Actually, if I reduce the FFT size a little bit, those periods should become a little more well-defined. So you can see there's, a pulse, 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 pulse. This is probably some kind of a synchronization header. And then eventually we get into what's probably some data. So let's take a look at how we can demodulate this. And the nice thing is in Spectrum actually has some built-in demodulation capability. You have to kind of do a lot of things by hand, but you can demodulate a signal like this using nothing but in spectrum. So we know that the amplitude is being modulated here. The transmitter is basically being switched from full amplitude to zero amplitude. It's completely off. So what we need to do is add an amplitude plot. And this is where this line up here is where my demodulator is. And so the red line in the center is the center frequency of my tuning. And the white lines at the top and bottom are showing the edges of the filter that I'm using to filter this channel. And so you can kind of adjust. If you want a wider filter, you can drag them out. And if you want a narrower filter, in this case, my signal's fairly narrow, so I can pull those in. When you're demodulating an amplitude modulated signal, also when you're setting the maximum power will adjust the amplitude of the signal that you get down here when it's demodulated. So now you can see we get a very nice clean waveform there. You can see it jumps up to full amplitude and then back down to zero, and just a little bit of noise there down at the bottom. So the next thing that we can do is you can take this amplitude demodulated signal and you can add a derived plot to that and say you want a threshold plot. And now anything below this dotted line will be counted as a 0, and anything above the dotted line will be counted as a 1. So now we have a nice clean representation of kind of all the ons and offs in this signal. The next thing we need to do is figure out when we're going to measure this signal to see, where are the 1s and 0s. And to do that in Spectrum, you need to turn on the cursors. And cursors have a bunch of uses. You can also use them just to measure the baud rates of signals and things. So we can start by doing that, but eventually once you have the cursors set up properly, you can also use them to demodulate and extract data from things. So if I bring my cursor down, so I'm just looking at kind of one bit period there, one period where the transmitter is on, you can get a rough idea. It thinks that if the pulse is exactly that wide, then it should be about 714 baud. But what you can do is you can increase the number of symbols. So let's go up to 10 symbols, and you can see actually my bit period is a little bit too long, so my time is slipping. But if I narrow that down, look at that. Everything just kind of lines up really nicely about there. And now we're at 785 baud. And let me just bump this up now to, let's say, 50. And you can see again, I'm a little bit long. Things are drifting. But if we shorten that down, let's see, there. And that's just about lined up perfectly. And you can see now 798 baud. So probably this is 800 baud. Now if we want to get the rest of the bits out of this packet, I'm going to have to increase. I think this packet ended up being about 560 bits long. So let's scroll over. You can see my time is still slipping a little bit. So I'm probably a little bit far off to the right. We've slipped by an entire symbol there. So let's bring this across until things line up, and we'll skip one symbol there. Oh no, maybe I went too far. Let's try this. And we'll just scroll across and make sure that we're staying lined up with the bit periods there. It actually looks very good. It looks like my dotted lines are lining up exactly with the bit transitions. So once you have everything lined up like that, and we're lined up on the threshold plot, you can right-click there and say extract symbols. You can either go to standard output or to the clipboard. And now my clipboard should have a set of bits. Okay, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0. That sounds about right for the start of the signal. And then eventually we get into where the actual bits of the message are. I won't go into the details of extracting the rest of this message, but really I wanted these things to be as simple as possible, thus the challenge being called GMOD 101. So everything is kind of high signal-to-noise ratio, and there's no interfering signals or anything. And so I chose the simplest scheme that I could think of to encode information here. So it's just using ASCII. Each sequence of 8 bits represents a character. The only ambiguity then is you need to figure out what is the start of a bit. Where is the start of a byte? Because each byte is a sequence of 8 bits, and it's not immediately clear looking at this which is the first bit in a byte. So this is where I usually use a little bit of Python code. And you can try each of the possible 8 offsets for where a byte would start, and then you just decode them as ASCII, and you get a message out. So that's how to do how to demodulate an amplitude modulated signal. And let's clear away these plots. And now we can look at the second signal. So I'm going to have to scroll over. We'll get rid of our cursors too. So let's scroll over to the second signal and have a look at this one. Now, what do you notice about this signal? You can see it's not always at the same frequency. You can see it kind of shifting up and down over time. And this is a modulation technique called frequency shift keying. And so the information here is encoded in the frequency information. So you can see there's kind of looks like the sequence of zeros there, and then we have 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0. Just like we had before, that's kind of a training sequence to let the receiver lock onto the signal. And then eventually the repeating sequence of ones and zeros stops, and now we have kind of some more random transitions there between 1 and 0. I'll bump up the FFT size a little bit so you can see that the transition between frequencies a little more clearly. So we can tell that it's a frequency modulated signal, and so we need to add a frequency plot, and so I'll bring that up here. Oops. Gotta get my finger right on that. Okay, I'll put the red line hopefully in between those two frequencies that we care about. It's a little bit difficult at this FFT size, but I think that should be close. And I'll narrow down the filter so it's not much wider than the signal. And if we scroll down now and have a look, there is our frequency demodulated signal. It's pretty easy to kind of read off the zeros and ones above and below that dotted line. And now we can use the same trick as before. We'll say that we want to add a threshold plot to that and scroll down, and now we have a nice clean plot of zeros and ones. And exactly as before, now I can bring up my cursors here. Let's go back to one symbol. There we go. So one symbol is about that wide, and we'll bump it up to, let's say, 20 symbols, and we can get this thing just perfectly lined up to figure out what the baud rate is. Looks like our baud rate is probably 600 baud. We got 597. And same thing here, I can increase the number of symbols until it's about as long as my packet and do the fine-tuning of the time synchronization, extract bits, and same thing. We'll get a sequence of ones and zeros. It's ASCII, and you extract data from it. So that's how you get data out of the FSK signal. And we'll remove these plots again. The last one, if we scroll over, you can see this one, you don't really see too much there. It just looks kind of like the transmitter is on. It's not changing in frequency. Doesn't seem to be changing in amplitude. So, it almost looks like there's no information there at all. Let me just increase the FFT size so we can get a little closer look at it. You can see there's kind of maybe a little bit of structure there. At the beginning it kind of separates into two discrete frequencies and bounces back a little bit, so that you can almost see like there's a little bit of information encoded in there. And yeah, who knows what kind of modulation this is? Anyone?
Looks like phase shift.
Yeah, so this is a phase shift keying signal, PSK, and in particular this is using binary phase shift. So basically the signal shifts back and forth between two phases that are 180 degrees apart from each other. And of course, it doesn't matter which of those two phases you have, the amplitude is going to be the same, the frequency is going to be the same. So that's why we don't really see any information on the frequency axis, and we don't see anything of interest in terms of amplitude. It's always kind of the same amplitude. So InSpectrum does have a phase demodulator. I'm going to need both hands on my touchpad here to get this tuned. There it is. The UI could definitely be better. So if I bring that down right about to the middle and narrow the filter down, we might see something interesting down here. But the issue that you run into with phase modulated signals is that if you don't have the frequency exactly bang on, then your phase is going to slip over time. And you can see these diagonal lines. That's where we keep losing our, it's because we're off in frequency. And if you shift this up and down, the slope of those lines will change, but I can never quite get it right on. So this is why in spectrum doesn't end up being too terribly useful for phase modulated signals. It doesn't really have any kind of frequency correction, and so you can't go through the same process that I did before. So for this one, you do have to do something like use a GNU radio flow graph. So I can show the GNU radio flow graph. I think if I zoomed in a little bit more on the FFT, I could get finer control over the frequency, and you can use that. You can at least see the individual bits once you get that far. I think we might see one bit over here where my cursor is. You can measure the length of that to figure out the baud rate. And once you know the baud rate, then you can come up with a GNU radio flow graph. Let's see, GNU radio companion. So yeah, this should be the solution for decoding the PSK signal. So here I just bring in the input file, throttle it. I'm using a frequency translating FIR filter because you could see that the signal was down well below 0 hertz, so I need to shift that up so that it's centered around 0. Then I have a raised cosine filter in here. This is a pulse shaping filter, which is needed to match the filter that's used on the transmitter. And then I'm using a symbol sync block to lock on and sample at the exact right time when the signal is at the phase that you're supposed to receive. And then I bring that into a constellation receiver block, and the bits come out of this top output here, and then I'm using a correlate access code because if you looked at the amplitude and frequency modulated signals, you would see like the first 2 characters that were transmitted were actually an access code or a synchronization word that just kind of indicate where the start of the packet is here. So these correlate access code will just look for where that sync word starts, and then they know that they should start receiving there, and then the output gets sent to this message printer. Let's see if this actually will do the thing when I run it. Here it goes. So yes, you get the output there. Flag, it's just a phase. So this flow graph does work. I think there are some other tools, like maybe Universal Radio Hacker or SIG-Digger may let you do PSK demodulation right within the GUI itself. But you can also, I usually end up using GNU Radio and using the PSK demodulation stuff that's built in. So that's that. Any questions about these ones? Yeah, go ahead.
So on your symbol sync, you have 10 samples per symbol.
Yep.
Is that just kind of like a guess and check for you? So if you didn't know what that was?
Yeah, how do you know how many samples there are per symbol? Well, if I had spent a little bit more time in Spectrum, we could have worked out what the baud rate was. I think it's 1200 baud in this case. And so then you just need to take your sample rate and divide by that, and then that'll tell you how many samples there are per symbol. So let's see, we're starting out at 480,000 samples per second, but I'm actually running that through a frequency translating FIR filter that has a decimation factor of 40. So you need to take the 480,000 and divide it by 40 to figure out what the sample rate is after this point. So, yeah, I don't know.
You can see that in your filter block. It's got the numbers.
Yeah. Oh, does it? Okay. Where do you see that?
The root raised cosine.
Oh, root raised cosine. Okay, yeah. So now we're down to, now we're down to 12,000 samples per second. And we know that our baud rate is 1200, so that's a ratio of 10. So that means that there's exactly 10 samples per per symbol, or very close to 10 samples per symbol. The symbol sync takes care of the fact that it might actually be 10.001 or maybe it's 9.999 because the clocks are drifting a little bit. So symbol sync is what makes sure that you're sampling at exactly the center, and it assumes that symbols are arriving at more or less 10 samples per symbol. And then the other issue you run into with phase demodulate, with phase shift keying, is that if your frequency is off even slightly, then the constellation will start rotating, and so your symbols will rotate away from the 0 and 180 degree points where you want them to be, and this constellation receiver block takes care of that. And it keeps track of whether you're drifting in frequency and gets you back so that the symbols stay lined up. I think we can, in the graphic, I have a constellation sync, so you should be able to see down here in the bottom, there's no data being transmitted right now, and then it very briefly split out, and you could see the 2 constellation points before it stopped transmitting. Yeah, that's it. Any other questions about DMOD 101? Thanks. Okay. Were there other challenge tracks that anyone wanted to take a look at? Gold? Yes, let's take a look at Go for the Gold. And this is actually, it's a really good transition from DMOD 101 because once you've learned how to demodulate phase modulated signals, that's exactly what you would need for Go for the Gold. So let's take a look at the Go for the Gold challenge. So it says here, I heard this unusual signal which doesn't seem to decode the normal way. I think it might be spoofed. Any idea what it means? So let's take a look at what the signal looks like. And actually, before we do that, let's take a look at the SIGMF meta file. So a couple interesting things about this. First thing you might notice is the sample rate is 4,092,000 samples per second, which is kind of odd. Like, why wouldn't it just be 4 million? So that's a little bit unusual, and we'll come back to that. Second thing is this frequency. I mean, it's a very specific frequency. So you might look at that and think, okay, I wonder what's actually at that frequency. If you look up this frequency, it is exactly the frequency of the course acquisition code of GPS. Okay, so you probably will start to suspect that this signal has something to do with GPS, or maybe it's similar to GPS. The problem kind of suggests that it doesn't demodulate as if it was the right thing. So it's probably not actually a GPS signal, but maybe something very similar. So if you go and look up a bit of information on how GPS signals work, you find out that the course acquisition code is on that frequency. And Wikipedia, of course, has lots of useful information about how that signal is encoded. So you can see it uses a gold code, and the challenge is called Go for the Gold. So you probably can conclude that there's going to be a gold code involved here. And it also tells you that it's transmitted with a period, so it uses a 1023 chip sequence, and it's transmitted at 1023 megachips per second. So this 1023 number, if you go back to what our sample rate is, this is exactly 4 times 1.023 million. So, this frequency, the sampling frequency being exactly 4 times the chip rate, would suggest that, well, you're going to have 4 samples per symbol, and so you could very easily, fire that into something like the demodulator I showed in the last flow graph. It's kind of another hint that, probably this whatever we're looking at is going to have more or less the characteristics you'd expect. Okay, so now let's go have a look at the signal itself. In Spectrum, and what was it called? Gold 1. And so we bring this thing up. I'll decrease my FFT size a little bit. So a lot like the the phase modulated signal that we were looking at in the previous challenge, you can see it looks pretty constant. There doesn't seem to be any amplitude information there. There doesn't seem to be any change in frequency, so you can conclude that it's probably some kind of a phase modulated signal. So either PSK, QPSK, maybe QAM, something like that. The other thing that pops out to me when I look at this, it looks very repetitive. You can kind of see, if you squint a little bit, you can kind of see like the same sort of pattern showing up in the FFT every so often, and that's exactly what you would expect if you look a little bit more into how these gold codes are used to encode signals. If you do some reading about GPS, you might know that for one, you can decode GPS signals that are way below the noise floor. So how does that work? And the other thing is that all of the GPS satellites transmit on exactly the same frequency. So how are you going to be able to hear, what one satellite is saying versus another if they're all transmitting at the same time on the same frequency? So they're using a system called Code Division Multiple Access, or CDMA, and this is a system that allows you to have multiple transmitters going on the same frequency at the same time. The way that it works is that you take a signal that's running at kind of a slow baud rate, and you multiply it by a chip sequence, which is a repeating sequence of ones and zeros that's at a much faster rate than the sequence in question. And so in the case of GPS, it's running 1,023 times as fast. So you have this sequence of 1,023 bits. If you transmit a 0, you just transmit that sequence as is, and if you want to transmit a 1, you invert that sequence, and everywhere where there's a 1, you replace it with a 0, and vice versa. So what's actually getting transmitted is over and over this sequence of 1,023 bits, and it might be as is or it might be inverted, but those are all going to kind of look the same in the FFT when you look at them. So that's why this repetition happens. Okay, and then let's take a look at how we might go about demodulating this. Now, first thing you can do with this signal, if you look at it, GPS signal would be way buried in the noise, you wouldn't see anything. But this one you can see there's a nice high SNR here. So you could just decode it with an ordinary PSK demodulator. You'd get 1,023 bits in place of each 1 bit of the input. And so you could just split it into sequences of 10,023 bits, and then the zeros and ones would very clearly stand out because the ones that have inverted bits would be a 1, and you could get your message out that way. I think I probably have a solution here that I used for this. Whoops. GNU Radio Companion. Okay. So yeah, this is the flow graph that I used to generate challenge number 1, and here's what I'm using as the solution for it. So here actually I'm not doing it. I'm not doing an ordinary PSK demod here. Here I'm actually decoding it the way that you would decode a CDMA signal. So I explained earlier how you transmit one of these things. You take your sequence of zeros and ones and you multiply it by this chip sequence. And that's called spreading. It makes the signal much wider than it originally would have been. And then in your receiver, you do what's called despreading. And the way you normally do that is that you use a correlator, which has exactly the same sequence of 1,023 bits. And to implement a correlator in GNU Radio, you can just use an FIR or an FFT filter, and all you do is you reverse the order of the sequence, and you use that as the taps for your sequence. So I have this FFT filter here. The taps are just the 1023-bit gold code, and then I have a little bit of Python here to multiply that out because we need 4 samples per symbol, so it's just repeating each of the bits of the gold code 4 times. We put that into a filter, and if we filter our signal using that particular sequence, where did it go? Here it is. So you can see what we get are these correlation peaks that show up once every 1,023 samples. And you can almost read off the bits there. It looks like, it's probably, well, if that first one was a 0, well, then we'd have 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0. So you can almost read it off by eye. Of course, eventually the signal might rotate a little bit, and the angles of those two symbols would be a little bit off. So you do need to do some synchronization work to get back to the nice constellation with 0 and 180 degree points. So we do the correlation, and then to read off those peaks and figure out which is which, I just put together a little embedded Python block which does the peak detection. I'll show you the code. It's a little bit complicated because when you're writing one of these peak detectors, you kind of need, like if it's unlocked, you need to figure out where the first peak is, and then once you're locked, you use that to guess where the next peak is going to be. It'll be 1,023 samples later. So it ends up being a little bit of code in Python, but it's not actually that complicated. Basically what it's doing is it's just scanning along looking for a peak and then checking for another peak that's a little while later, and it extracts the sample that occurs at the highest part of the peak. And then once those peak samples are extracted, we just fire them into a constellation receiver in GNU Radio, and it can carry on. We write the bits out to a file, and you can extract the flag from that. So that was part one. I think a fair number of teams were able to solve that one. Well, let's see, go for the gold. Oh, we had 4 solves. And then, so that was go for the gold part one. Part two, let's have a look at that in Spectrum. And that one was gold 2. So part 2 was really more of the same. I'll just adjust my maximum and minimum amplitudes there. So you can see, looks exactly the same. And you can decode it the same way you could the others. Now let's suppose you were doing things the simple way and you were just firing a PSK demodulator on this and then extracting the symbols by looking at which sequence of 1,023 bits you see. That'll work fine until right here where a second transmitter fires up and starts transmitting. And at that point you won't be able to decode the bits anymore because now you have an interfering signal. And then a little while later a third transmitter starts firing up. So you're going to have even more interference. And then, the noise floor comes way up. And now all of these signals are buried under the noise. So, and in fact, this first one, if you start to decode it kind of the naive way, it'll say like, well, hello there, the flag is, and then you reach this point where it's all buried in the noise. If you try to do it the naive way, you'll get just enough to convince you that you need to try harder. And that's where you need to start using a proper correlator and despreading the sequence. Once you fire a correlator at this, it's no problem. So the first flag is right here, and the flag itself gets buried under the noise here. And then there's a second flag, which this transmitter is sending out. And then the third flag is this transmitter here that you can barely see, and its transmission is more or less entirely buried in this noise. If we go back over to GNU Radio, the solution here, it's the same as the previous flow graph. There's just 3 copies of things. And the triple CDMA, why you can have multiple transmitters running on the same frequency, is that you choose your sequences so that they are as orthogonal as possible to each other, so that they don't correlate with each other. And so those gold codes are they're chosen to have the best possible correlation properties. So they correlate with each other as little as possible, regardless of what offset they have with respect to each other. So the first transmitter is using the first GPS satellite's gold code, and then the second transmitter is using the second gold code that GPS uses, and not surprisingly, the third transmitter is using the third GPS gold code sequence. You could, if you didn't know offhand what those sequences were and couldn't find them anywhere, I mean, you could have just gone to the beginning here and you can read off the sequence by putting a PSK demodulator on this. And the second transmitter, it's the only one transmitting over here, so you could get its gold code sequence out if you wanted. The third one, of course, it's only transmitting when the other transmitters and the noise are there, so you couldn't, there's no way of getting it like that. But if you look around online, there's lots of people who posted C++ and Python code that'll generate these things. And in the repository that I posted, there's also a script there that just, it's a little Python script that spits out the particular gold codes that GPS uses. So yes, that's go for the gold. Does anyone have questions about that one?
I have a general question. Is
Yep.
there anyone else who solved this differently?
Yeah. Anyone? I expect, let's see who did solve it. With registration desk, night shift. Yeah, Andrew, Computational Solutions was remote, so they wouldn't be here. So yeah, I think there were more teams that might have got, I don't know, probably the same two that got part 2. Did anybody get part 1? Same 2 teams. So yeah, somebody at the registration desk night shift would have known how to solve. Oh, I think I know who it was. Hollis, yeah. And I talked to him, and yeah, he solved it using the expected way. Like he wrote a correlator and peak detector, and solved it the standard CDMA way. I think it would have been pretty hard to get it any other way, I think. All right. Anyway, we're running a bit long on time here, so I don't know if people want to keep going. I do, like, there are still other ones we could look at, or we could leave it there. Any requests for other ones? Don't see any, so let's leave it at that. We'll end the live stream, and if you want to know more, there's a bunch of ways that you can get more information. Some of us are going to have blog posts coming out. Danny Estevez, who wrote the DBB S2 challenge series, he's going to have a blog post out sometime in the next couple of days. I'm probably going to write up a blog post about my challenges, and some other people may as well. You've seen in the channel that a lot of us have already posted GitHub repositories that have the source code that we use to generate, and in a lot of cases the solutions are in there too. I know Jeff included solutions, I included solutions. So all that's going to be up. What I'm going to do is on the main page of the CTF, if you go back to the home page here, there's not a lot here, just links to the previous years, but down here I'm going to put a section with blog posts, with source code, with the recording of this session, so that anyone can go back and find solutions and information about how all this stuff was built. Also, this is all going to stay running as long as we can keep it up. You can see we still have the 2022 and 2020 CTFs up with all the challenges still playable, and we're going to try and keep these ones playable for as long as possible, so you can keep coming back. If there were challenges that you didn't get, you can go back, have a second look at them. You can still submit flags, and it'll tell you whether it was right or not. So we'll try to keep it going as long as we can. That's it. Thanks for playing, everybody, and I hope to see you next year.
Just real quick, a round of applause for Clayton. Thank you again for running CTF.